All right. Library on Wheels, Mary Lemmis Titcomb, and America's First Bookmobile by Charlie Glynn. Oh, I wanted to read this slide. For Mary and all the other unsung heroines of history. So here are a couple of pictures of her as well in places that she's from. Okay. Mary Lemmis Titcomb grew up wanting to do things. The problem was people were always telling her that she couldn't. She couldn't do this because she was too young. She couldn't do that because she was a girl, or because her family didn't have enough money, or because it just wasn't practical. But Mary never gave up. Mary was born on May 16th, 1852, in Farmington, New Hampshire. Though from a poor family and in a day when academic opportunities for women were scarce, Mary was intent on getting a good education. When her family moved to Exeter, New Hampshire, so that Mary's brother could attend the respected Phillips Exeter Academy, Mary begged for a chance to continue her schooling too. Although it was unusual for farm girls to attend school beyond the eighth grade, wow, that's young. Mary's parents supported the idea, and they enrolled Mary and her sister Lydia in the newly established Robinson Female Seminary in Exeter, a school that was meant to be the academic equivalent for girls of the Phillips Exeter Academy. Mary loved her time at the seminary. She graduated in 1873, but continued to study French and German there as an unmatriculated student for several more years. As Mary's brothers began leaving home to start their careers, Mary wanted to do something too. Unfortunately, aside from teaching and nursing, not many careers were open to women in the mid 19th century. Her brother George became a doctor, so Mary thought she might try nursing, but she grew queasy at the mere sight of blood. And because she felt she lacked patience, she did not think she was well suited for teaching. We do have to have patience. One day, Mary read an article in a church bulletin about an emerging new field of work, librarianship. Mary had always loved reading. She couldn't imagine anything better than being a librarian, working all day with books and sharing those volumes with other people. That seemed the perfect life for a bookworm like her. But no formal training schools for librarians existed yet. She would have to learn the profession as an apprentice. Moving to Concord, Massachusetts, where her brother George lived, Mary began working in the library there as an unpaid assistant. She learned everything she could about librarianship, book acquisitions, binding, cataloging, classification, library administration, and more. Mary, or Miss Titcomb as she was now called, loved nothing more than seeing people's eyes light up when she placed the perfect book in their hands. After completing her apprenticeship in Concord, Miss Titcomb was hired as a cataloger at the Rutland Free Library in Vermont. Within a short while, she moved up into the position of chief librarian. So as you can see these old pictures of it, oh, that's so cool. Wow. Okay. Miss Titcomb had found her life's work. In 1893, Miss Titcomb submitted an application to serve as one of the librarians in the Women's Building Library at the World's Columbian Exposition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair. The whole county was abuzz with excitement. The whole country was abuzz with excitement over this fair, and Miss Titcomb was eager to be a part of it. Her application to serve at the Women's Building Library, however, was rejected by Mr. Melville Dewey. What a name. He sounds like a rejecter, right? The originator of the famous Dewey Decimal System and president of the American Library Association, ALA. Dewey wrote that those selected would include only women who have been very prominent in the National Association and its work and who are very familiar with general library interests throughout the country. He added, however admirable Miss Titcomb's work may have been with you, Rutland Free Library in Vermont, she has not made herself known outside. Perhaps spurred on by Dewey's somewhat curt dismissal, Miss Titcomb, rather than gave up, worked tirelessly over the next few years, both to make a name for herself and to make a difference in her chosen profession. So he was like rejection, and she was like, this is him. This is his face. He looks like someone who's rejecting everybody, right? Whatever, whatever. She continually looked for ways to improve librarianship, to render it both more efficient and more far reaching. In 1895, she was elected executive secretary of the First Vermont Library Commission and served in that capacity for the next 5 years. As such, she was one of the first women to hold a state office in Vermont. As executive secretary of the commission, Miss Titcomb aided in the establishment, organization, and improvement of dozens of libraries in Vermont and wrote articles giving advice and encouragement to librarians throughout the state. In one such bulletin, she urged librarians to do all in your power to make the library useful. Do not make the mistake of thinking children are of no consequence. If there is any preference, let it be shown to them. Later in 1914, she was elected to serve as the second vice president of the ALA. Mary has certainly made herself known outside the Rutland Free Library in Vermont, and one can't help but imagine how validating this must have felt for her in the light of Melville Dewey's earlier disregard. She and Mr. Dewey were, in fact, later to become good friends, or frenemies. T. In 1910, Mr. Dewey sent Mary this postcard with a note that was very complimentary of her work. So first he rejects her, and then she comes up and she's like all great and stuff. And he's like, oh, yeah, we could be friends. I don't know. So he wrote her this little thing congratulating her and whatnot, which is super nice. But you could have been nice before. I mean, whatever. Meanwhile, in the thriving county seat of Hagerstown, Maryland, a forward-thinking citizen by the name of Edward W. Mealy decided that Washington County needed a library. Mr. Mealy had been educated at Harvard University, studious, and had observed firsthand the growth of the library movement in New England. So he set about raising funds for the construction of a local library. Once the building was complete, he began looking for a trained librarian to run it. His search took him to New England, where he found Miss Titcomb. He was later lauded for being the instrument in the hands of God which brought Mary L. Titcomb to the people of Washington County. Mary's friends and family thought it would be unwise for her to leave her secure position in Vermont to go by herself to rural Maryland. But Mary, always independent, was eager to take on this new challenge. In February 1901, she packed up her belongings and left for Hagerstown to assume her position as head librarian of the brand new Washington County Free Library. She said, peace. You go, girl. Oh, the plan she had for the library. Here we go. Public lending libraries were still a fairly new idea in America, and county libraries that served not only the residents of a particular town or city, but an entire county, sometimes hundreds of square miles long, were almost unheard of. In fact, the Washington County Free Library was only the second county-wide library in the nation. That's crazy. The first, the Brumback Library, located in Van Wert, Ohio, or is it Wert? Yeah, it's Wert, had opened its doors only a few months earlier. There were those who thought the whole venture would be a failure. They felt that the country's farmers and working people had no time or use for books. Others were angry that the library's board of directors had brought in an outsider to run the operations. How dare you? As Joseph C. Byron, president of the board, last wrote in the foreword to the story of the Washington County Free Library, people were not educated up to the idea of a public library. Libraries were for the idle and the rich. It remained for Miss Titcomb to show us that libraries are intended for the middle class of people, the working man and woman and children particularly. Once again, Miss Titcomb ignored the naysayers and went to work. She said, what? Don't see you, haters. Awesome. I just love this lady. When the Washington County Free Library opened its doors on August 27, 1901, the citizens of Hagerstown showed up in throngs, and as Miss Titcomb later wrote, any secret and lingering doubts as to acceptance of the institution were dispelled once and for all. Miss Titcomb liked to tell about how one scrub woman? I wonder what a scrub woman is, left the library that day, a book wrapped carefully in her apron, exclaiming, it's a great day when poor folks like us can take home such handsome books. I'm guessing like a cleaning person. The library was an undisputed success. Miss Titcomb later wrote that the library at once established itself as an educational, recreational, and democratizing, influence in the community, bringing all classes of people to it. Wow. I promise I can read. But Miss Titcomb knew that the library was not yet achieving its full purpose. It had been established for all the residents of Washington County, but over half of them, some 25,000 people, lived far from town on farms scattered across nearly 500 square miles. How to get the library's books to them? I don't know. Miss Titcomb was determined that everyone should have access to the library, not just adults, not just the rich or educated, not just those who lived in town. She was absolutely unwavering in her dedication to this vision. First, she opened a children's room in the library, one of the first in the nation. She also made sure that all the outlying village schools had a good rotating supply of books and pictures from the library. Then she started a storytelling hour in remote areas to get the country children excited about books and reading. She's awesome. Next, she set up deposit stations throughout the county. These served as small branch libraries where people could check out books, then return the ones they had already read. As Miss Titcomb wrote, since its doors were open in 1901, it has been the unceasing effort of the management to make the library as vital a thing in the country as in the town. To this end, deposit stations, 75 in number, have been scattered over its territory, placed in the country store, the post office, the creameries, like the where they cremate people, at the toll gates, or if nothing better offered, in some private houses. As successful as the book deposit stations were, they still weren't serving all the country's residents, especially those who lived on backcountry roads, far up in the foothills of the Blue Ridge and Cumberland Mountains. But Miss Titcomb didn't give up. In 1905, she had her most revolutionary idea of all horse-drawn back book wagon. That's crazy. Why not fit a wagon with shelves and take the library to the people, she thought. The book goes to the man. We do not wait for the man to come to the book. You go, girl. Again, the naysayers were quick to voice their objections. It seemed outlandish, like an outlandish proposition to them. A wagon to take books to every farmhouse in the country? Farmers didn't have time to read books. And who was going to pay for this new contraption anyway? Here, indeed, we embarked upon an uncharted sea, admitted Miss Titcomb. But she was not deterred. She was like, no, we're going to do this. She met with several wagon makers and came up with a design. Then she presented her idea to the board of trustees at the library. They scratched their heads. It sounded like a crazy plan, but by now, the board had learned that when Miss Titcomb decided to do something, she did it. They granted their approval. In just 4 short years since her arrival, Miss Titcomb had won the hearts and gained the admiration of library board and the people of Hagerstown. Oh, that's so sweet. To Miss Titcomb alone belongs the credit of the upbuilding of the library. Her personality has been stamped upon it. She's never gone backward. She has not even faltered, wrote Call Joseph C. Byron, the president of the library's board of trustees. In a local newspaper article declared that steadily Miss Titcomb has won her way among us, disarming criticism, overcoming prejudice, strengthening her influence. The library refuses to stand still, wrote Call Joseph C. Byron. Why do we keep writing his full name? In 1931. And the reason is Miss Titcomb. To attempt to write the history of the Washington County Free Library without devoting some time to Miss Titcomb would be like trying to write the history of the Ark without mentioning Noah. That's a Christian reference. Having gained the approval of the library board, Miss Titcomb and the wagon makers went to work. The book wagon had long shelves built on each side covered by doors that open outward. The shelf could hold about 200 books, and the main body of the wagon could also carry several large cases of books for the deposit stations along the route. According to Miss Titcomb, the horse-drawn conveyance looked like a cross between a grocer's delivery wagon and the tin peddler's cart of bygone New England days. When Miss Titcomb first saw the finished book wagon, she worried that it looked too much like a laundry truck or a peddler's wagon. So she instructed the builder to paint the whole thing a dignified black and to print Washington County Free Library on the sides in plain lettering with no scrolls or fuss. The painter followed these directions very well, maybe too well, for when the book wagon approached a farmhouse on one of its first trips into the countryside, the driver heard a nervous voice call out, "You need to stop here. We ain't got no use for the dead wagon here." After that, Miss Tickum wasted no time in painting the book wagon's wheels and door panels a bright cherry red to avoid any confusion with a hearsay. The book wagon made its maiden voyage in April 1905. Although Miss Tickum rode along whenever she could, she still had her duties to fulfill back at the main library. So Mr. Joshua Thomas, a library janitor, was enlisted to be the driver. The wagon was pulled by a pair of dapper horses named Black Beauty and Dandy. Oh, I'm guessing that's the those are the two horses right there. That's the wagon too. Mr. Thompson had grown up in Washington County and was a veteran of the Civil War. After the war, he'd made a living by riding throughout the countryside, buying produce, eggs, and butter to sell in the market in Hagerstown. In this way, wrote Miss Titcomb, he learned every road and byway in the county, and was known by all the residents, unconsciously being prepared for this later undertaking. To Miss Titcomb's way of thinking, the human element was a critical part of the book wagon experience, and Mr. Thompson related well to people, especially farmers. And Mr. Thompson obviously loved his job. On the 1910 U.S. Census, he listed his occupation as book missionary. The book wagon, or book contraption, as some of the locals called it, made 31 trips in the first 6 months and lent out over 1,000 books. Wow, that's amazing. For the next 5 years, the book wagon faithfully traveled the roads of Washington County, carrying volumes to the outlying villages and farms. Children who had never owned a book in their lives suddenly could borrow dozens at a time. Oh, that makes me cry. That's beautiful. The sound of the approaching book wagon brings the family from the fields, the barns, and the house, wrote Miss Sitcom. It's an important day when the Washington County book wagon stops at the farm because the family is allowed to borrow as many as 30 books at a time from scientific treatise on farming, treatise. I'm gonna have to look that word up. For for father to colored pictured books for baby. The book wagon had exceeded everyone's expectations. Then, in the fall of 1910, disaster struck. The book wagon was hit by a train while crossing the, oh my goodness, that's terrible, Norfolk and Western Railway tracks at St. James. Fortunately, the horses were not injured and Mr. Thomas escaped with only minor bruises. The book wagon, however, was completely destroyed, along with all its books. For a while, it looked as if it might be the end of the bold new experiment. That's scary. But Miss Sitcom didn't give up. She secured funds for a new wagon for a longtime member of the library board who had watched her do what so many had said she couldn't be done. With full confidence in Miss Titcom and her dream, this board member, Mr. William Kelfler, or Kielhofer, I'm terrible with names, as you guys can see, stepped forward with a donation of 2,500. That doesn't sound like a lot right now, but it was a lot back then, for the purchase of a new book wagon. The horseless carriage was beginning to replace the horse and buggy, and Miss Titcomb and the board decided to buy a motorized vehicle this time, a customized International Harvester auto wagon that could hold 300 bucks. As Mr. Thomas did not know how to operate a motor car, Miss Titcomb and the board hired a driver and put Miss Nellie Chrissinger, an assistant librarian, in charge of the new book wagon. Miss Chrissinger would spend the next 24 years traveling throughout Washington County in a wagon. Wow, that's a long time. She later said, "The library is my whole life, and the book wagon is the real joy in that life." With the new truck, the the library's outreach expanded. Scope of the library's outreach expanded. New routes were added, and the book truck was able to cover each route 3 times a year. Just 3 years later, an even larger vehicle was needed. The new book wagon would carry 500 books and up to 6 cases for the deposit stations and schools. It was roomy enough to seat Miss Chrissinger, the driver, and one additional passenger. That extra seat was rarely empty because by the time the book wagon was becoming quite famous, politicians, journalists, librarians, and many other interested people came from all over the country to ride along and observe firsthand the magic of America's first traveling library. Soon, book wagons began appearing in other parts of the country, Indiana, Minnesota, Delaware, Illinois, and by 1922, the book wagon idea had received widespread support, thanks largely to the efforts of Miss Titcomb, who wrote and lectured about it extensively. The bookmobile had been born, and thanks to Mary Lemis Titcomb, the determined girl who never gave up, America was changed forever. And that's the end. But then they have a lot of really great photos Like, look at how far it's come, right? Right? Yeah, just wanted to share that with you guys. And that is my reading. I'm sorry that I wasn't amazing because it's so late and I'm tired. But there it is.